The water looked like glass that afternoon, smooth and still, reflecting the tall cypress trees that lined the edge of the private lake behind the Dawson family's estate just outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and 5-year-old Emma was crouched near the shoreline, her little fingers reaching for a smooth stone she'd spotted half buried in the mud, completely unaware that something was watching her from beneath that perfect, mirror-like surface, something ancient and patient, something that had been drifting closer to shore for the last several minutes without making a single ripple, and then the water broke, just barely, just enough for 2 dark eyes and the ridge of a massive snout to emerge, and standing about 20 feet behind Emma was the family's 4-year-old German Shepherd mix named Boone, and Boone saw it before anyone else did, his entire body going rigid, his ears pinning forward, and then he started barking. Not the playful bark he used when chasing squirrels, but something sharper, something urgent, something that came from deep in his chest like a warning siren, and Emma didn't even look up because she was too focused on that stone, and the alligator, easily 10 feet long judging by the width of its head, began moving toward the shore with slow, deliberate purpose, its massive body now visible just beneath the water's surface, and Boone didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward in a dead sprint, crossing the distance in seconds, and he planted himself directly between Emma and the water, his body low and tense, his barking now almost frantic. And this is where I need you to pause with me for just a moment, because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, is this dog fast enough? Is this dog strong enough? Can this dog actually stop what's coming? And the honest answer is I don't know yet, because we need to go back a few hours to understand how this family ended up in this situation and why nobody saw it coming until it was almost too late. So let me take you back to earlier that same afternoon, because the truth is, this entire day had warning signs written all over it, and every single one of them was ignored. It was a Saturday in late April, one of those perfect Louisiana spring days where the humidity hadn't quite reached its summer peak yet and the sky was that deep, endless blue that makes you want to spend every second outside, and the Dawson family had only been living in this lakeside estate for about 8 months, having relocated from Houston when Marcus Dawson's tech company expanded into the Gulf region, and the property was stunning, a sprawling modern home with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private lake that stretched nearly half a mile across, complete with a wooden dock, a boat house, and acres of perfectly manicured lawn that sloped gently down toward the water's edge. And when they'd bought the place, Marcus had done his research. He knew alligators were common in Louisiana. He'd seen the warning signs posted along public waterways, but their realtor had assured them that this particular lake was regularly monitored, that wildlife management kept the population in check, that in 15 years there had never been a serious incident on any of the properties surrounding this body of water, and Marcus had believed it because he wanted to believe it, because the house was perfect and the price was right and his kids loved running around that massive backyard. So he'd signed the papers and moved his family in, and honestly hadn't thought much about alligators since. Maybe once or twice when he'd see a nature documentary or hear something on the local news. But nothing that made him feel like his children were in real danger just playing in their own backyard. And that's the thing about feeling safe, sometimes it makes you stop paying attention to the things that should worry you. That Saturday morning, Marcus and his wife Jennifer were both dealing with work emergencies that had somehow bled into the weekend. Marcus on a conference call with overseas investors and Jennifer handling a crisis with one of her marketing clients, and they'd let the kids play outside because the weather was perfect, and Emma's older brother Tyler, who was 9, had promised to keep an eye on her, and Boone was out there too. And Marcus remembered thinking as he'd watched them through the window that everything was fine. The dog was with them, Tyler was responsible, the yard was fenced except for the section near the lake, which had always seemed fine because the kids knew not to go in the water without an adult. But here's what Marcus didn't notice that morning, here's what neither he nor Jennifer picked up on because they were too focused on their phones and their laptops and their endless stream of notifications. Boone had been acting strange since sunrise. Not sick strange, but alert strange, restless strange, the kind of behavior that would have caught their attention if they'd been paying any attention at all. And it started when Marcus had thrown a tennis ball toward the lake for Boone to fetch, something he did almost every morning, and Boone had stopped about 30 feet from the water and refused to go any further, just stood there staring at the surface, his tail low, his body tense, and Marcus had laughed and called him lazy, grabbed another ball and thrown it even closer to the water's edge, and Boone had barked once, sharp and short, and then turned around and walked back toward the house, and Marcus had shaken his head and muttered something about the dog being dramatic and gone back inside to start his call, and Jennifer had noticed Boone pacing near the back door around mid-morning, whining softly, looking out toward the lake, and she'd let him out thinking he just needed to use the bathroom. But instead of doing his business, he'd walked straight to where the kids were playing and positioned himself between them and the water and stayed there. And Tyler had complained that Boone was being weird, that he kept blocking him every time he tried to walk toward the dock, and Jennifer had told Tyler to just ignore the dog and keep playing, and nobody, not Marcus, not Jennifer, not even Tyler, had stopped to wonder why this usually playful, easygoing dog had suddenly become so fixated on that lake, why his entire demeanor had shifted, why he seemed to be standing guard. And looking back now, Marcus would tell you that Boone knew, somehow Boone knew something was out there long before any human had a clue. Around 2 in the afternoon, the birds left, and this is one of those details that seems insignificant until you understand what it means, because there had been herons near the water all morning, egrets in the shallows, a few ducks drifting lazily near the center of the lake, and then within about 10 minutes they were all gone, just lifted off and flew away like someone had fired a starting pistol, and the lake went quiet. That kind of quiet that feels heavy, that kind of quiet that should make you look up from your phone and pay attention. But Marcus was in the middle of explaining quarterly projections and Jennifer was typing an email and the kids were running around the yard and nobody noticed the silence except Boone, who had stopped pacing and gone completely still, his eyes locked on a spot near the western edge of the lake where the water met a patch of tall reeds, and he started growling, low and steady, not aggressive but warning, like he was telling something out there that he saw it, that he was watching. And Emma wandered closer to the shore because she'd spotted a butterfly and wanted to chase it, and Boone immediately moved to intercept her, gently pushing her back with his body, and Emma giggled and thought it was a game and pushed back against him, and Boone let her push him but didn't let her get past him, and Tyler was over by the dock throwing rocks into the water and didn't see any of this. And inside the house Marcus wrapped up his call and Jennifer finished her email and they both decided they deserved a quick coffee break before the next wave of work hit, so they stood in the kitchen talking, occasionally glancing out the window, seeing their kids in the yard, seeing their dog nearby, assuming everything was fine because why wouldn't it be? That's when it happened, and I need you to understand how fast this all went because when you hear about alligator attacks, you think you'd see it coming, you think you'd have time to react, but the reality is these animals are ambush predators, they are patient beyond anything you can imagine. They can wait for hours, days even, until the moment is perfect, and then they move with explosive speed that seems impossible for something so large. And the alligator that had been watching from those reeds, a massive male that wildlife officers would later estimate weighed close to 500 pounds, had been tracking movement along that shoreline all day, had watched the children run back and forth, had noticed the small one kept wandering closer, and now the small one was crouched near the water's edge, almost within range, and the larger animal, the dog, was momentarily distracted by the other child near the dock, and this was the opening. This was the moment, so the alligator began its approach, sliding forward through the water without creating so much as a ripple, using its powerful tail to propel itself in slow, controlled movements, closing the distance inch by inch, and when it was about 15 feet from shore it let its head break the surface, just enough to see, just enough to gauge the distance, and that's when Boone saw it, really saw it, not just sensed something was wrong but actually locked eyes on the threat, and everything about his body language changed in that instant. The growling stopped and was replaced by explosive barking, the kind that made Tyler drop his rock and Jennifer set down her coffee cup and Marcus look up from his phone, and Boone was already running, his legs churning across the grass, and Emma was still crouched there picking at that stone, completely oblivious, and the alligator surged forward, no more patience, no more stealth. Just raw predatory power launching itself toward shore with shocking speed, its massive jaws slightly open, its tail thrashing against the water. Boone reached Emma first, but just barely, sliding to a stop between her and the water, spinning to face the alligator with his teeth bared and his hackles raised, and he was barking so loud and so fierce that Emma finally looked up and saw what was coming out of the water and screamed, and that scream is what finally got Marcus moving, what made him drop his phone and sprint for the back door. But he was 100 yards away and the alligator was 10 feet from his daughter and the only thing standing between them was his dog, and Boone didn't back down, didn't run, didn't hesitate for even a second. He lunged forward and snapped at the alligator's face, not trying to bite it, that would have been suicide, but trying to draw its attention, trying to make himself the bigger threat, and the alligator hissed, this deep guttural sound that Jennifer would later say haunted her dreams for months, and it opened its jaws wide, showing rows of teeth that were designed to grip and never let Go, and Boone danced back, staying just outside the range of those jaws, barking and snapping and moving side to side, and Emma had fallen backward and was crying and trying to crawl away, and the alligator's focus split between the noisy threat directly in front of it and the small prey trying to escape behind, and this is exactly what Boone was counting on, this moment of hesitation, this confusion, because every second he bought was another second for Emma to get further from the water. Another second for Marcus to get closer, and the alligator lunged toward Emma and Boone threw himself into its path, and there was this horrible moment where the alligator's jaws snapped shut inches from Boone's flank, so close that later they'd find a tear in his fur where teeth had grazed him, and Boone yelped but didn't retreat, just repositioned and kept barking, kept moving, kept putting himself between the predator and the child. Marcus reached them, finally, his lungs burning and his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode, and he scooped Emma up in one motion and started running back toward the house, and Jennifer was at the door screaming for Tyler to get inside, and the alligator could have pursued, could have chased them down, but Boone was still there, still barking, still making himself impossible to ignore, and somewhere in that ancient reptile brain a calculation was being made, risk versus reward. Expended energy versus likelihood of success, and with the small prey now being carried away and this aggressive animal still in its face, the math didn't work anymore, so the alligator held its ground for a few more seconds, jaws still open in threat display, and then it slowly began backing toward the water, not in defeat but in retreat, deciding that this particular hunt was over, that there would be other opportunities, and Boone followed it, not close enough to be grabbed but close enough to make sure it kept moving, barking until that massive body had slipped back beneath the surface, barking until the ripples had faded, barking until he was absolutely certain the threat was gone, and only then did he turn and run back to his family, limping slightly from where the alligator's teeth had grazed him but alive, and that's when Marcus dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the dog who had just saved his daughter's life. The wildlife officers arrived within the hour, a team that specialized in nuisance alligator removal, and they told Marcus things he wished he'd known before, like how alligators are most active in spring during mating season, how they're more likely to approach residential areas when they're hungry or territorial, how small children and pets are often targeted because they look like easy prey near the water's edge, and they found the alligator relatively quickly, still lurking in those western reeds, and they removed it, relocated it to a more remote area away from residential properties, and they told Marcus that his dog had probably saved his daughter's life, that the attack window for an alligator is seconds, that once those jaws close on a target, especially a target as small as a 5-year-old, the outcome is almost never good, and Marcus just nodded, unable to speak, replaying every moment of that day in his head. Every warning sign he'd ignored, the way Boone had refused to fetch near the water, the way Boone had been pacing and whining and positioning himself between the kids and the lake all day, the way the birds had left and the lake had gone quiet and he'd been too focused on his stupid phone to notice any of it, and he kept thinking about how close he'd come to losing Emma, how different this story could have ended, how that casket would have been so small, and he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except hold his daughter and his dog and shake. That evening, after the wildlife officers had left and Tyler was asleep and Emma was finally calm, Marcus sat on the back porch with Boone beside him, looking out at the lake that no longer looked peaceful, that now looked like exactly what it was, a habitat for predators, a place where danger lived beneath the surface, and Boone's wound had been cleaned and bandaged by the vet who'd made an emergency house call, and it wasn't serious, just a superficial graze, but it could have been so much worse, and Marcus ran his hand along Boone's back and said, quietly, so quietly that Jennifer barely heard him from the doorway, "I should have listened to you, boy, you were trying to tell me all day, and I didn't listen," and Boone just leaned into him, pressed his body against Marcus's side, didn't need praise or recognition, didn't need anything except to be close to his people, and that's the thing about dogs, that's the thing that still gets me, they don't protect us because they expect something in return, they protect us because we're their pack, because keeping us safe is written into their DNA, because for them there is no calculation, no risk assessment, no hesitation, there's just love and loyalty and the willingness to put themselves between us and whatever's trying to hurt us. They fenced off the entire lake area the next week, proper fencing with concrete footers that went 2 feet into the ground, and they installed motion sensor lights and cameras, and they had a wildlife management company come out monthly to check for any alligator activity, and they never let the kids play near the water unsupervised again, and some people might think that sounds excessive, might think they were overreacting. But those people haven't stood where Marcus stood, haven't felt that ice-cold terror of watching a predator emerge from the water 10 feet from their child, haven't had to rely on their dog to buy them the seconds they needed to save their daughter's life, and at night now, every night, Boone sleeps outside Emma's bedroom door, has chosen that spot, won't sleep anywhere else, and Emma has started calling him her guardian, doesn't fully understand yet what he did for her but knows enough to know that he kept her safe. And Marcus watches them sometimes, watches his daughter hug that dog, watches Boone rest his head on her lap, and he thinks about how danger doesn't always announce itself, how sometimes it glides silently toward the shore while you're looking at your phone, how sometimes the only warning you get comes from an animal who can't speak but communicates everything through behavior you have to be paying attention to see. I think about this story a lot, about how quickly everything can change, about how the things we dismiss as dramatic or paranoid are sometimes the things trying hardest to protect us, and I think about Boone, standing there at the water's edge, 90 pounds against 500, refusing to back down, refusing to let that alligator reach Emma even if it meant getting hurt, even if it meant dying, because that's what family does. That's what real protection looks like, and it doesn't always. Raw, sometimes it just plants itself between you and the danger and says not today, not on my watch, not while I'm still standing. So let me ask you something, and I really want to know what you think. Do you believe dogs can sense danger before we do? Do you think there's something in them that picks up on threats we can't see or hear or understand? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story reminded you of your own dog, your own guardian, share it with someone who understands what it means to be loved and protected by an animal who would do anything to keep them safe.